What do you think of the Boy Scouts with the you know?
Yeah, I know. I know. I know.
Are you in favor of it or against it? Where do you stand on this?
How do you describe so completely against it you want to break things? Let me explain. I have a dog in this fight. My brother and I were both Eagle Scouts. 4 of my nephews were Eagle Scouts. Scouting is a big part of my growing up. So I'm not one of these people who don't really know anything about it but are willing to talk. Oh, yes. I think it's important that we make it all gender inclusive and really? Were you ever a scout? Well, no. Let's see. Or else? Oh, yes, of course I was a scout. Really? Were you an Eagle Scout? Well, no, I never really got beyond tenderfoot. This is stupid. It's horrendous. One of the things that's powering it, though, in terms of giving them a market from which to draw, has been the decline of the Girl Scouts into a feminist organization. Because I can understand this. A lot of parents of daughters don't want them exposed to that. So the Scouts, the Boy Scouts, or IT Scouts, or whatever we're going to be called, Scouts BSA, emphasis on the BS, I think. I can see completely why they would want to pull their daughters out of the Girl Scouts into the Boy Scouts. So the Girl Scouts are fighting tooth and nail. I would tell those ladies that if you don't want to lose, stop being stupid. Get rid of your feminist agenda and go back to the original ideas of people like Lady Baden-Powell, Olive Lady Baden-Powell. Similarly, for the Boy Scouts, now here, this kind of a long story. The Boy Scouts of America go back to 1905 or so, 1906. Now, are you familiar with the history of scouting at all?
Not at all.
Well, scouting was founded by a gentleman called Lord Baden-Powell, oddly enough, the husband of Lady Baden-Powell. It's one of those odd, clicky, kinky dinks that happen to people. Anyway, during the Boer War, Lord Baden-Powell was in charge of the city of Mafeking, in the Transvaal, which was under siege by the Boers. Well, there were a number of young lads from, say, 11 to 18, and he put them together into a scouting force so that the adult males could be released to man the barricades against the Boers. And so these kids were used to run ammunition behind the lines, messages, all sorts of things, to free up adult males. Well, he found he had a knack for working with kids, which he had not known before that. So he wanted to develop a program to take young men like that, and get them, partly to teach them what it is to be a man. I know. How can you even say that there's something separate like manhood? Oh, I know. Shut bloody up. That was a special message from me to all you non-gender people out there. Here's another one. That was vulgar. But as I was saying, you see, having a gender of my own, I'm proud of both of them, but not the others, or the third one that Governor Brown has. Anyway, as I was saying before I allowed my emotions to catch up with me, the scouting movement was born from him and a lot of other people putting their heads together about the best way to turn young men, to turn young boys into men, into gentlemen, into people who would serve their God and their country loyally, who would have the knowledge to survive in unpleasant situations, the leadership skills to get other people to do the same. Things like that. Woodcraft, all these sorts of things. And in the original British version, there was a lot of African influence for the Vel, scouting and all that, in place of our own American Indian influence, which was very big in the scouting movement. Although Baden-Powell was also very much connected with the whole notion of what they called Red Indians in those days. But also Kipling was a big part of British scouting. And the whole Jungle Book motif. So you've got those African, Indian, and North American influences in scouting from the very beginning.
Interesting.
And initially, scouting went throughout the British Empire very quickly, and then spread outside France, Russia, the United States, Latin America, all over the world, because it met a perennial need. All right. Now, what happened then was that in 1905, a gentleman called William Dboys, 1900 I think was when the Scouts were first organized in England. Could be wrong on my dates, but in 1905, an American was in London called William Dboys, and he was lost in the fog. He couldn't find the way back to his hotel. So up comes a kid in a funny uniform, and he says, "Are you lost, sir?" And he said, "Yeah." "Well, I'll guide you back where we have to go." So he told him, and he guided him back to his hotel. Boyce offered him money, and he said, "Oh, no, thank you, sir. I'm a Boy Scout. We don't take money for that sort of thing." And off he went. Well, Boyce was very impressed. And the next day, he took out an ad in all the major British publications asking for the name of the lad who had guided him. Never found out. So to this day, we call that kid the Unknown Scout. But Boyce came back to the United States, driven with the idea of starting an American Boy Scout equivalent. And he got together with people like Ernest Thompson Seton and some others, and they founded the Boy Scouts of America, about 1907, 1908. 1909 maybe. Anyway, whatever it was, the first edition of the Boy Scout Handbook came out. And the original Scout uniform, some elements of which have been retained at the present day, was designed. And for a long time, it was a really successful program. It worked quite well, but you began to get problems in the 60s. Several things happened. First, you had the development of a huge bureaucracy. First in New Jersey, then they moved to Dallas, Texas. I mean, a big thing. Now, what was the problem with big bureaucracy, you ask? Well, the answer is, you've got to defend it and keep it fed. That's the problem with big bureaucracy. So where everything had been, where most things had been done on the local level on a volunteer basis, this thing happened. The second thing that happened was the collapse of the family in the 60s and 70s. Because the heart and soul of the scouting movement was the participation of fathers. Now, obviously, not every father with a scout son participated, but a lot of them did.
Yeah.
So your assistant scoutmaster, sometimes your scoutmaster himself would be a father. And every committee was made up of fathers. The chairman of the committee was a father. But as the broken home motif became ever more popular in our dying society, you had more and more boys who didn't have a father at home. Now, there had always been a certain amount of these, but in that case, the scoutmaster, the assistant scoutmasters, and to some degree, the fathers of the committee or whatever, would take up the slack. But now there were so many of these that it began to be pushed for the women's, the mothers, to come into the committees and to sometimes act as assistant scoutmistresses and so forth. They didn't call them assistant scoutmistresses. But, so that began to put us on the road to where we are. Then in the 90s, it began to be pointed out that the Scouts were discriminatory, since they did not allow atheists, self-proclaimed atheists. As far as scouting goes, Baden-Powell and the rest, his followers, always called for a religious basis to scouting. Now, in the continent, that led to scouting's fragmenting. In every major European country, you have basically three versions of Scouts: Catholic, Protestant, and moral but neutral. But in Britain and in the United States, it didn't happen that way. We did not fragment. The British later did fragment between the regular Scouts and what are called Baden-Powell Scouts, who are considered to be more loyal to the original vision of the founder. But in this country, the BSA remained a pretty big tent. The Mormons became ever more important. And then, but whatever you were expected to follow your own faith. So for instance, and this was helped by the fact that scout troops would be sponsored often by churches of different denominations, but not exclusively. Some of them would be sponsored by Kiwanis or Rotary or an American Legion post, a VFW post. So it was a mix of things, traditionally. All right, well, and I'm giving you this long explanation, ladies and gentlemen, because this is history most people don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, what should happen? But that starting in the 90s, pressure began to be brought to bear on the Scouts, partly because they did not allow atheists, and partly because they did not allow self-declared gay Scouts. Now, there's something I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen. Scouting for me was one of the most asexual experiences of my entire life.
Yeah.
It was something that never came up, and nothing we ever discussed. It just wasn't there. The whole notion of kids that young declaring themselves gay is the creation of diseased, shall I say, pedophilic minds, yearning to help them with their issues. Yeah, I don't mind saying that. And yeah, the Scouts had the same problem with child molestation that other organizations that deal with kids tend to have. Molesters gonna molest, right up there with bigots gonna big and haters gonna hate.
Yeah.
And obviously they did various things to stop them coming in. Not always successful, certainly. But this whole notion of the sexualization of the Scouts is disgusting. And those who have pushed it are disgusting people, personally, as individuals. Let me make that really, really clear. All right. So, as gaiety became more important to our ruling class and our owners, local governments, who had always been friendly to Scouting, began to put pressure on them. So, for instance, the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, wink, wink, they had in one of their parks a beautiful building the Scouts had built, but they rented it from the city of Philadelphia for $1 a month, or $1 a year, rather. Led by Tony Rizzo Jr., the son of the great mayor of Philadelphia, but personally a piece of garbage himself, the city council declared that from now on they were going to be charging the Scouts market price, market value. And you know, inner city Philadelphia.
What does that mean?
It means they'd force the Scouts out of their own building. That's what it means. It means that Rizzo and the rest of that mob of morons would drive them right out of the building they themselves had built. So, but they weren't the only ones. I mean, under Bush Jr., the Department of Defense were given the, because of the non-gay policy, the Department of Defense ordered to stop helping with the Scouts. Because before there had been, Scouting had been able to use different campgrounds and so on, different facilities, and armed forces property. And that was under the great Republican Bush Jr. So these things it was getting more, and philanthropists who were pro-gay or gay themselves or whatever began pulling money from the Scouts. And all this started heating up. And it, of course, got worse under Mr. Obama, who, you know, was of nothing if not loving himself. And finally, the 2015, we had, of course, the great Mr. Justice Anthony Kennedy, that good Catholic, decided that marriage was intended by the founders of the Constitution to include same-sex marriages. Because Mr. Justice Anthony Kennedy, being himself all-knowing and all-wise, and better than anyone who ever lived, Mr. Justice Kennedy knew all this stuff. I hate to tell you which organ I think he drew the decision from. Anyway, It was his pancreas. In case you know.
Oh, okay.
What did you think I was going to say?
Oh, gosh, I had no idea.
Well, there's a lot of selections. In any given body, there's a lot of organs to pull garbage out of. In his case, it was his pancreas.
Okay.
So, anyway. So, what happened was that there were a number of people in the Central Administration and Scouting who were fearful for the fate of the bureaucracy thereof, and saw that money was being lost. It was going to be a big, hard fight, and they didn't have the stomach for it. By this time, the largest single financial backer of Scouting were the Mormons. I mean, there's Catholic elements, and so every element is there. But the Mormons were the biggest, with the biggest financial push. So, what should happen? Initially, when this stuff was booted about, and I have personal knowledge of this, I don't mind saying, local Mormons all over the place stood up and said, "We're not going to stand for this. No way, Jose." Well, my brother and myself, having long-term experience with these sorts of things, we were drinking in a bar one night, don't be shocked. And the vote for the BSA Central Committee was coming up on the issue. And we were regaling each other with how various Mormon friends had sworn they were going to basically fight to the barricades. You know, start their own institution if they had to, but they weren't, no way they would give in. And we looked at each other and said, we hope that's true, but if the prophet in Salt Lake City sees differently, it'll change.
Okay.
And they have a history of this. Whenever the politics get too rough, the prophet in Salt Lake City gets a different revelation.
Is that what they call it? Wait, what do you...
Yeah, it's the prophet.
That's their
President,
leader,
prophet, trustee,
figure?
and trust. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's their pope.
Okay.
Only he's got more power than the pope. Because he can change revelation. And the pope, even if they're stupid enough to try, they can't.
He can change their revelation?
Sure can. In the 70s, for instance, up until the 70s, blacks could not be priests in the Mormon church because they were the descendants of Cain.
Okay.
In the Book of Mormon.
Right, yeah.
So, but in the 70s, after the civil rights movement and all that, the Mormon church began to look bad as a result. Suddenly the prophet and trustee and trust got a special message from above, and the religion altered.
Really? That's how they did that?
That's how they did that. So ongoing revelation.
Okay, so moving on. So the prophet changed his mind on the Boy Scouts, and
The
they're not gonna
next bloody day.
After the bar?
The day after the bar. The next day. Whoosh, woo, that wind blowing around awful quick. I don't know. Man, Lawson better get in the cellar. This wind blowing hard. So what should happen? But that they caved. But then at the time, the Boy Scouts said, of course, this only applies to boys who are gay. It doesn't apply to, we won't have gay adult leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, my brother and I looked at each other and snickered. Like that was going to last. Sure enough, 2-3 months later, poof, literally. So, that was that. Well then, about a year ago, or less than that, the Mormon church suddenly clutched its pearls and screamed in horror that there were gays being admitted into the Boy Scouts after they themselves had signed off on them. So they decided to pull out of Boy Scouting and start their own organization. See, rather than fighting the way they said they were, they pulled out. Well, now the bureaucracy in Dallas are faced with a problem. That's a huge chunk. How do you deal with that? You open the doors to chicklets, knowing that there's a ready-made market of disaffected Girl Scout parents.
Ah.
See? Not so stupid when it comes to keeping their guts full.
No, not at all. They're survivors.
Just eating up that chow. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I give them everything that's in the trash from our commissariat.
Yeah.
And if it actually makes its way to the trash from the commissariat outside of strike times, it's been in the commissariat a while.
Yeah.
So so that's the great scouting adventure, and it's horrible. Now, fortunately, the national and archdiocesan and diocesan councils of Catholic Scouting have been about as useful as three-legged steers in terms of dealing with all this. There have been a couple of dioceses, where, and I mean a couple, is in 2 or 3 in this country, where the bishops have disassociated themselves from scouting over the whole thing. But most of them, it's business as usual. And why shouldn't it be? It's kind of like watching the Episcopal Church fall apart all over again.
Yeah, wow.
And for an organization with such a proud heritage and history that's done so much good for so many people, yeah, I'm pissed off. Oh yeah, royally.